Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Brooklyn Tea Party meeting for our September meeting, September 18, 2022. Today we have a special guest, State Senate candidate Brian Fox. Everyone knows Brian. Brian ran last year for City Council against Justin Brennan. On election day, he was up by 255 votes. See, Republicans could, like Ina Vernikov proved that Republicans could win in Brooklyn. But we all know what happened with those elusive paper ballots, right?
Yep.
At least 16 people that he seen in his campaign voted dead, right? Dead people come to vote. And they were all registered Democrats, right? We'll get ghost hunters to come out and see how that happened. Yeah, so we'll see what happens, how the dead voted. But as we all know with the paper ballots, as we saw with the presidential race, how that could be. But still, at the very end, it was a 51-49. He obviously, unfortunately, did not win, but he gave a good try, especially in that area. So 51-49 shows that Republicans could win.
Yes.
Okay? Right now, he's running for state senate against Andrew Gonatas, who's basically one and the same with Justin Brennan. And he's that district now is Bay Ridge, Dyke Park, Windsor Terrace, Park Slope, and a whole bunch of other little neighborhoods mixed in. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please give a long, nice, warm Thank you very much, Glenn. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Glenn, and the Brooklyn Tea Party for having me. Like you just mentioned, actually, it was quite the interesting run last year for City Council. Quite a bit of entertaining back and forth. I know we were pretty much came down to a very, very tight race, and obviously, like Glenn mentioned, 255 votes up on election night, and winding up waiting 13 days effectively, where I was councilman-elect for the better part of almost 2 weeks before paper ballots wound up coming in. The one thing that I realized, I actually stated this on my launch video for New York State Senate, was I realized even post losing the election, I realized that my job and my community's job wasn't over, not even close to being over. The fact that we got as close as we did and we were up on election night just went to go show you that my agenda, my platform resonated with the modern Democrats, those that still exist in the modern democratic world, but it resonated with them. And again, a lot of my platform this year is very, very much the same. It's running purely on a fundamental platform of making sure that obviously our police department is protected. We're refunding our police department, not defunding our police department. We're continuing to support our emergency services personnel, our corrections officers, the fire department. The bulk of the people that live, especially in my neighborhood, Bay Ridge and Dyker Heights, or with their occupations are firefighters, police officers, EMS services. So it's vital to continue to support those individuals that basically allow us to live our day-to-day lives and not have concerns that one would have elsewhere. But point being, we're starting to see a trend, and unfortunately it's a downward spiral and a downward trajectory. A lot of that comes from the top. So just to be straight, just to be upfront, Mayor Eric Adams has done a disastrous job since being elected. That I just want to be clear on that. While he's out having $1,000 dinners and out at the local discotheque, we're all here in the community that are suffering, unfortunately. Sex crimes, violent crimes, shootings, armed burglaries have all gone up triple digits even since last year. Specifically in my neighborhood, they will try to, the opposition will try to suppress crime stats. They will try to say that's not true. They will try to say that they're isolated incidences. Bullcrap. In my opinion, we have to have, the need for law and order has to come back into every single neighborhood, and it frankly starts with local election. We're never going to see any change at the congressional level, at the mayoral level, unless we start electing local officials that are holding people accountable, especially the politicians that are do-nothing politicians. Frankly, the people that I've run against are a large part of a much, much bigger picture, unfortunately. And that's part of the issue, right? And the reason I had so much pushback in my race from last year for city council is because we were exposing all of it. We were exposing that Councilman Brannan voted on 2 separate fiscal cycles that he voted to take money away from the police department. That's in black and white. That's a Google search. That's, you know, the fact that he tried to deny it. Look, I mean, his base is never going to be convinced otherwise. We're never going to win those votes anyway. But by and large, you know, we did a very good job at exposing just who he really was. My opponent this year is very much, by and large, is the same. Shares the same ideology. He wants to defund the police. He co-sponsored bail reform, which in itself I think is enough to run on any candidate. It could be me, it could be anyone else. I feel like if anyone running on, you know, their opposition co-sponsoring bail reform is absolutely ridiculous. I'm very, very much embedded, obviously, into the police department. I keep very, very close contact with the NYPD, the captains, the sergeants. I'm endorsed by a number of the local police unions. Even for this race, and what I can tell you is, based on what's going on, the moral is at an all-time low in the police department and on the beat cops. There's absolutely no incentive to make arrests because these individuals are getting let back out on the same day to commit the same crime. We have qualified immunity where now the cops are personally liable or can get personally sued if the individual that they're arresting feels that they're using excessive force. So it's really twofold. My way of combating that, something that I've looked to implement once in office, is twofold. Bringing back broken windows policing and bringing back the plainclothes unit. I think that the combination of the two will really stop and prohibit a lot of the repeat offenses going on, especially when it comes to the vandalism and burglaries. We actually just had, I don't know, maybe some are familiar, maybe not, but in Bay Ridge specifically, we actually had 8 separate small businesses get robbed in about the span of about 48 hours. So we're talking about business closing down, or excuse me, not closing down, but they, you know, basically shut for the evening. People coming in, looting, taking money out of the cash register, and vandalizing. So it's a big problem, right? And the local politicians have done absolutely nothing to address it. Nothing. In fact, during the COVID, you know, towards the end of my city council run, because of COVID and several other reasons, the local police department was depleted by nearly 60% in my neighborhood in Bay Ridge. They were depleted nearly by 60%, meaning that, you know, there was a fraction of the police department officers and on the beat cops that are even available to respond to calls, which is absolutely ridiculous. Going back to, I guess now, you know, kind of fast forwarding to my current race, like I was telling everybody here, I think that the one thing that I realized that we have a very, very big task at hand, not just as someone running for public office, but for the general public, the people that are voting, hopefully potential individuals like myself, into office. We have to continue to spread the word and make sure that we actually come out and vote. Now, that's a lot. That's you know, people say that all the time. I'm sure politicians say it all the time, but it's so vital that the people that genuinely want change, we have to bring them out. We have to vote. There's no other way to change what's going on. You know, it also it's you know, the other side of that is the individual, at least from what I'm seeing from the Democratic primary of my opponent. His opponent was David Yaski, which is predominantly known in North Brooklyn. What we saw from the polls and the numbers is North Brooklyn did not come out for David Yaski. So what does that tell us in this particular race? It means that most of the votes came from South Brooklyn. So I think that by and large, even though my district is very, very different, you know, obviously we have Dumbo, we have Cobble Hill, we have Windsor Terrace. It looks a lot different than the city council seat of District 43. Myself and my team, who've been campaigning for probably about 12 to 14 hours a day all across the district, the message and the concerns are still very much unified. And again, going back to fundamentals, crime, everyone is concerned about crime. Doesn't matter if you're in the, quote, deep blue area of the district or you're in Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights. Crime is a #1 issue that everyone wants and needs to address. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, I've spoken to both sides, they know that crime has to be addressed. School safety is another big one. I mean, unfortunately, there was not school related, but we're starting to see a lot more shootings happen, specifically in Sunset Park. That's a big one. There's a lot of gangs in Sunset Park. They're starting to spill into Bay Ridge. I mean, I can't tell you, there's countless amount of even my city council run up until now, countless amount of press conferences I held from broad daylight shootings, and they're starting to trickle into now our neighborhood. The things that we're now seeing on the media and the TV are now trickling into our neighborhoods, and unfortunately has affected some of us, perhaps even in this room. I know that I actually had a friend, unfortunately, it was actually a friend through one of my other staffers in my campaign. One of his friends, unfortunately, ended up being a victim to one of these particular situations. There was an argument, there was a stabbing by Caterina's. I don't know if any of you guys know Caterina's in Bay Ridge, but it was during the winter time of 2021. He was essentially stabbed several times and bled out on the street. He was he was a kid, he was 21 years old. So that's just an example of, and unfortunately, I wasn't very close to him, but one of my staffers was best friends with him. And unfortunately, it's just a prime example of what we need to do to change that, right? And again, it's something that it's terrible, and we're starting to see it happen more and more. Again, the triple digits just from last year. That's insane. We have a mayor that's obviously not doing anything to address the crime. I mean, he's too busy wine dining and pocket lining himself. We have my opponent, who basically shares the same ideology and agenda as Councilman Justin Brandon, which is defunding the police, making sure that he's embedded with the real estate developers, and not to mention the Nathan's deal by Bay Ridge and Dyker Heights. That's a whole separate. I could talk for another 2 hours about that, but I'll save that for another time. But the level of just sheer corruption, really. I mean, even at a local level. I mean, we're talking about a local race here. We're not talking about congressional. We're not talking about a mayoral race. We're talking, the corruption is hit home in a local race. And I think, again, the one way to combat that is to make sure that all of our relatives, everybody that we know that share our agenda, that share our ideology, come out and vote. And it is possible. We can't lose hope. We can't lose faith in the fact that New York City is just a lost cause. And I tell you, I have a lot of friends, family, people that I know that they're starting to move. I know Glenn and I were talking about that earlier, that people are starting to move out of state, West Virginia, Kentucky, Florida, other areas, basically anywhere other than New York City, right? You go further up north in the Adirondacks or Western New York, by and large, New York State is pretty red. But when it comes to the city, obviously it's been pretty Democratic stronghold. We can't lose faith. I mean, my race is just an example of one of many as to why we need to keep fighting. Ina Vernikoff, who was here at the last meeting, is another prime example of her winning very, very dominantly in her race. There's a lot of candidates, like, again, even now for the gubernatorial race, Lee Zeldin is like literally, very, very, very close to taking out Hochul. And I've shared a lot of conversations with Lee Zeldin, and he's a phenomenal gubernatorial candidate. And it goes down the line. I mean, I share a lot of in common with Alec Brooke-Krasny, who's a good example because he was a lifelong Democrat who recently switched parties and was formerly for state assemblyman for the 46th district as a Democrat. And we have great conversations even to today. And he left the party because of how far left and progressive the party was going. So now he's actually running as a Republican for state assembly for the same seat. But it just goes to show you that even the Democrats now are starting to walk away from their own party because they've gone way, way too far left. They've gone way out of control far left. So, again, I think that, when it comes to, a lot of people ask me, well, how do we help? Aside from obviously voting, how do we help? I think that by and large, I can speak on behalf of other candidates. In this particular election cycle, it comes down to volunteering and it comes down to donations, right? So, and again, even if it's a smaller type of coffee clutch, even if there's, let's say, 5 or 10 people in a room, or someone hosts in their backyard, or something that's maybe perhaps not even as formal. I mean, that I can't tell you to stress enough. That's huge in terms of holding events like that for candidates and supporting them and getting them in front of new people, new faces. That way, you're spreading the message. And then when it comes to volunteering, I think that by and large, everyone needs help in volunteering. If you're not as mobile, there's always opportunities and options for phone banking, for calling voters and identifying voters who are going to plan on voting for either myself or other Republicans on election night for November 8th. Phone banking is huge. Door-to-door is a big initiative with the Brooklyn GOP specifically. Lit dropping is another initiative. So there's so many ways that you can help out each individual campaign. And I think that we just need to have a much, I'd say we need, over the last couple of years, I think we've done a better job at doing it. I still think that there could be a larger push for just everyone helping out, right? And the one good thing, is for other candidates that are in the mix, I think that I've never seen the party more unified over the last, let's say, 2-3 years, meaning that our message is unified. Alec and I share the same message, whereas myself and Lee Zeldin share the same message. Myself and Nicole Malay-Takis share the same message. So there's a level of unity when it comes to people running for office, or whether they're getting reelected or running for the first time. There's there's a level of synergy that's happening across the Republican Party, which is exciting because I think that we've never really gotten to that point over the last, I'd say, 7 to 10 years or so. So now that we have a unified message, we're all helping each other out. But we have to make sure it's vital that we come out and vote. It's vital that we continue to push back against the progressives. There's no other way. But again, I think we made tremendous strides. Ina being a very big part of that. Myself, obviously, coming that close to winning against an incumbent and someone that was bidding to be the Speaker of the New York City Council. Coming in as and I'll be humbled to the fact that I was relatively unknown coming into that race, and we took him out on election night. So. Lastly, I think that, again, my fight, I'm 33 years old. I've bought and sold several different companies in my private life. I've bought and sold 3 different financial services businesses. I just sold my 4th business to an IT conglomerate in Silicon Valley. So my background is traditionally in business, but I think that when I took that mentality and that rigor into politics, I think that that's what's made my running so very effective, and the fact that I'm willing to go into the Marty Golden effect. And for those of you that know Marty Golden, I make sure I go into every single storefront, every single bar, every single person in my neighborhood knows who I am, because I actually care. And I come from a small business background, so I want to make sure that the small businesses and the brick and mortars that are in my neighborhood stay in my neighborhood. It's very, very sad. There's one example, Nora, who she had an art store basically on 3rd Avenue. Was with the neighborhood for, I think, like 30 or 40 years, just closed because the pandemic and the way things are going with inflation. So she just couldn't survive, unfortunately. So, but my goal is to make sure that our streets remain safe, right, from a agenda and platform perspective. Quality of life issues are top priority, because for my opponent, he frankly has let that drop to the wayside. Quality of life is very, very, very important, whether you're a renter, whether you're a homeowner. We don't want to go out of our house and the first thing we see is trash and rats all over the place. I'm also an advocate for getting rid of a lot of the outside dining structures for the pure reason of the fact people coming into the neighborhood, it's very, very tough for them to park. If they can't park, they're likely not going to dine, and that's also going to cause revenue to drop locally in the neighborhood. Businesses are getting hurt because they can't park. So I'd be an advocate for that. And then again, when it comes to crime, we have to make sure when I went to the office, there's a discretionary budget, discretionary funds. I'm even going as far as taking a portion of the discretionary funds and putting it right back into the police department budget, because I think that that money's better well spent with the police department to hire more cops, to do more training, to make sure that we all remain safe and that we can live our day-to-day lives. Because frankly, they're putting their lives on the line, more than ever at this point, especially with the way they're being persecuted as just being police department, being police officers rather. Lastly, I think that also school choice and school safety is very, very big. School choice, obviously, you have to have, in my opinion, if you want to send your kid to a charter school or a private school, especially with the public schools now pushing critical race theory and everything else, all the crazy other things that we're seeing right now, it's younger and younger. I mean, it's getting as young as 4 or 5 years old where we're starting to see that, where they're trying to infiltrate our school systems. We even see it throughout the colleges now too. So, let's just say, for example, you send your kid to Penn State, you're spending $300,000 on their education to get a progressive ideology and progressive mentality to come from that education. It's ridiculous. But now that we're starting to see it at such a lower level, younger level, I should say, parents that don't want their kids to be exposed to that, they have to have an opportunity to send their kid either to a charter school or a private school, and I'd be an advocate to have a voucher for those individuals that want to send their kids to their charter or private school. When it comes to school safety, I don't want to give too much away, but over the next couple of weeks, I'm working with a company actually in New Jersey